In March 1968, the silence of the North Pacific was shattered by a catastrophic event that the Soviet Union would spend months trying to keep secret. A Golf II class ballistic missile submarine, designated K-129, suddenly vanished 1,500 miles northwest of Oahu. On board were nearly 100 sailors and a terrifying payload of 3 nuclear-tipped R-21 ballistic missiles. The Soviet Pacific Fleet launched a frantic, massive search operation, saturating the area with ships and acoustic sensors, but they were searching in the dark. Because the K-129 had been operating under strict radio silence, the Kremlin didn't know exactly where their vessel had suffered its terminal malfunction. After weeks of failing to find a single oil slick or piece of debris, the Soviets eventually abandoned the search, declaring the crew lost and the vessel unreachable at the bottom of a 4-mile-deep abyss. They believed the Pacific had swallowed their secrets forever, but they hadn't accounted for the reach of the United States Navy's SOSUS net. The American Sound Surveillance System, a secret network of underwater hydrophones, had captured the exact acoustic signature of the K-129's demise, the sound of an internal explosion followed by the haunting clun-clun of a hull collapsing under atmospheric pressure. Using triangulation, U.S. intelligence pinpointed the wreck within a 5-mile radius, sitting at a depth of 16,500 feet. This was a depth that defied all contemporary salvage capabilities. At 3 miles down, the water pressure is a crushing 7,000 pounds per square inch, and the temperature hovers just above freezing. To the U.S. Navy, the sub was a grave, but to the CIA, it was the greatest intelligence opportunity of the century. If they could reach the wreck, they could seize Soviet codebooks, cipher machines, and nuclear warhead technology that would fundamentally tilt the scales of the Cold War. The mission, codenamed Project Azorian, was handed to the CIA's Special Projects Division. They faced a twofold problem. The engineering was theoretically impossible, and the geopolitics were a minefield. Stealing a Soviet vessel from the high seas was a blatant violation of international law and a potential trigger for World War III. To pull it off, they needed a cover story so elaborate and so expensive that it would serve as a big lie. No one would think to question. They found their solution in the person of Howard Hughes, the world's most reclusive and eccentric billionaire. The CIA approached Hughes to front a massive commercial venture, deep-sea mining. The world was told that Hughes was building a one-of-a-kind ship to harvest manganese nodules, valuable mineral deposits, from the ocean floor. This provided a perfect front for the construction of a massive, specialized vessel that would cost the American taxpayer roughly $800 million, about $5 billion in today's currency. The vessel born from this deception was the Hughes Glomar Explorer, a 619-foot behemoth that looked like nothing else on the water. Its most critical feature was hidden entirely from view, a massive internal dock known as the Moon Pool. This hollow center allowed the ship to open its hull from the bottom, creating a secret hangar where the submarine could be pulled inside without ever being seen by Soviet satellites or passing ships. To actually grab the K-129, engineers designed a gargantuan mechanical claw nicknamed Clementine. This capture vehicle featured 8 massive steel tines designed to wrap around the submarine's hull. The plan was to lower Clementine on a 3-mile string of heavy steel pipe, section by section, and literally hoist the 2,000-ton submarine off the seabed. The engineering required was staggering. They had to develop a dynamic positioning system to keep the ship perfectly still over the wreck despite the ocean's heave, and a hydraulic suspension system to ensure the miles-long pipe didn't snap under the strain of the ship's movement. By 1974, the Glomar Explorer was ready to sail, but the tension was at a breaking point. As the ship moved toward the target site, the CIA began receiving intelligence that the Soviets were becoming suspicious of the mining operation. The Kremlin had dispatched oceanographic vessels and tugs to monitor the Glomar's movements. This set the stage for one of the most nerve-wracking encounters in naval history. While the CIA technicians were deep below deck, operating a giant claw in total secrecy, Soviet sailors were just a few hundred yards away, watching through binoculars unaware that the Americans were currently attempting to steal one of their nuclear submarines directly beneath their feet. The stage was set for the final descent, where the line between a historic intelligence coup and a global catastrophe would be decided by a few inches of steel. The Hughes Glomar Explorer arrived at the coordinates on July 4, 1974, ironically beginning its mission to dismantle Soviet secrets on America's Independence Day. The conditions were treacherous. The ship was buffeted by the unpredictable swells of the North Pacific, and the crew lived in constant fear of discovery. To keep the Soviet tugs and intelligence-gathering vessels at bay, the crew of the Glomar had to maintain the charade of deep-sea mining 24 hours a day. They went as far as to dump fake debris over the side and broadcast mundane radio chatter about mineral yields. Below the surface, however, the real drama was unfolding. The Clementine capture vehicle was being lowered one 30-foot pipe section at a time. It took days of painstaking work to reach the bottom. As the claw finally approached the seabed, the onboard cameras illuminated a haunting sight. The shattered remains of the K-129, partially buried in the silt, a nuclear tomb silent for 6 years. The precision required to position the claw over the submarine's hull was unlike anything ever attempted in maritime history. Using the dynamic positioning system, the ship's computers fought against the currents to keep the massive structure steady. When the command was finally given to close the fingers, the massive steel tines of Clementine bit into the mud and locked around the midsection of the K-129. The initial lift was the most dangerous moment. The suction of the seafloor mud could have easily snapped the pipe string, sending the claw and the submarine back into the abyss. But the hydraulics held. The heavy lift began, and for several days, the winch system slowly hauled the 2,000-ton prize toward the surface. The mood on the ship was electric. They were doing it. They were pulling off the impossible. Then disaster struck. At a depth of approximately 9,000 feet, roughly halfway to the surface, a massive shudder vibrated through the entire pipe string. One of the steel tines on the capture vehicle, weakened by a microscopic manufacturing flaw and the extreme stresses of the lift, suddenly snapped. The loss of a single finger caused a catastrophic chain reaction. The grip on the K-129 became unbalanced, and as the crew watched in horror on their monitors, the Soviet submarine began to break apart. Two-thirds of the vessel, including the coveted missile silos and the conning tower where the codebooks were kept, slid out of the claw's grasp and plummeted back down to the seafloor. The impact of the falling debris was so violent that it likely obliterated the very components the CIA had spent $800 million to recover. The crew was left with only the forward third of the submarine, the bow section, still held in the remaining fingers of the claw. The decision-makers on board faced a gut-wrenching choice: drop what was left and try again, or bring the fragment home. Fearing that the Soviets had witnessed the event on their sonar, the CIA ordered the recovery of the bow section. The fragment was pulled into the moon pool, and the massive gates were slammed shut. Inside the fragment, the CIA found the bodies of 6 Soviet sailors, whom they buried at sea with full military honors in a ceremony filmed in secret. While they recovered 2 nuclear torpedoes and some intelligence materials, the main prize, the codebooks and the ballistic missiles, remained at the bottom of the ocean. The mission's secrecy held until 1975, when a break-in at a Howard Hughes office led to the leaking of documents to the Los Angeles Times. The resulting media firestorm forced the government to respond, leading to the creation of the famous Glomar response, the phrase "we can neither confirm nor deny" that is still used by the CIA today. Project Azorian remains a polarizing chapter of the Cold War, a masterpiece of engineering and a testament to American audacity, but also a haunting reminder of the astronomical costs and risks of the secret war beneath the waves. The K-129 still rests in pieces on the Pacific floor, a silent monument to a mission that was almost too big to succeed. In the early morning hours of March 8, 1968, a Soviet Gulf II-class submarine, hull number K-129, was cruising at snorkel depth roughly 1,500 miles northwest of Oahu. It was a massive vessel, 324 feet of Soviet steel, powered by 3 massive diesel engines and carrying a crew of 98 men. But its true significance lay in its humps, 3 vertical silos housed in the enlarged conning tower, each containing an R-21 ballistic missile. These were not tactical weapons, they were city killers. Each missile was armed with a 1-megaton nuclear warhead, capable of vaporizing Honolulu or San Francisco in a matter of seconds. As the sub struggled against the choppy swells of the Pacific, something went catastrophically wrong. Whether it was a fuel leak in a missile silo, a battery explosion, or a localized fire, the result was a massive internal detonation. The hull was breached instantly. The K-129, once a pride of the Soviet Pacific Fleet, began a terrifying terminal tumble toward the abyss. As the vessel plummeted past its test depth of 300 meters, the pressure of the ocean began to exert its will. The internal compartments, still filled with air at surface pressure, became high-velocity vacuum chambers as the sea crushed the steel hull inward. The sound was picked up by the U.S. Navy's SOSUS sound surveillance system, a network of undersea hydrophones designed to track Soviet movements. To the analysts at the Air Force Technical Application Center, it wasn't just noise, it was a signature. They recorded a distinct acoustic event, a sharp spike followed by several smaller collapses. While the Soviet Navy spent the next 2 months frantically searching for their lost ship in the wrong area, the U.S. Navy's Project Sandollar had already narrowed the search to a small patch of ocean where the floor sat 16,500 feet below the surface. In late 1968, the USS Halibut, a specialized American spy sub, was dispatched to find the needle in the haystack. Using a towed camera fish, the Halibut took over 20,000 photos of the wreckage. The images revealed a miracle for the CIA. The K-129 had landed relatively intact. It lay on its starboard side, the conning tower and its nuclear missiles, still largely recognizable. This was the birth of Project Azorian. The Nixon administration realized that if they could recover the K-129, they would possess the holy grail of intelligence, the Soviet Union's cryptographic machines, and the secrets of their nuclear miniaturization. But how do you lift 2,000 tons of steel from a depth where the pressure is enough to flatten a car like a soda can? The CIA's Special Projects Division, led by John Perengoski and Ernest Zelmer, knew that conventional salvage was out of the question. No crane in existence could handle the load, and no cable was long enough to reach the bottom without snapping under its own weight. They needed a ship that didn't exist. To build it, they turned to the Global Marine Development Incorporated and the legendary, albeit eccentric, Howard Hughes. The cover story was a masterpiece of Cold War deception. Hughes announced he was building a revolutionary deep-sea mining ship, the Hughes Glomar Explorer, to harvest manganese nodules from the ocean floor. To the public and the Soviet scientific community, it seemed like a billionaire's expensive hobby. To the CIA, it was the perfect camouflage for an $800 million heist. The Glomar Explorer was a marvel of 1970s technology. It featured a massive moon pool, an internal hangar roughly the size of a football field, hidden behind 2 massive V-shaped gates at the bottom of the hull. This allowed the ship to hover over the wreck, lower its equipment, and pull the submarine inside without a single witness seeing the cargo. But the real star of the show was Clementine, the capture vehicle. This was a 2,000-ton mechanical claw equipped with 8 massive steel tines. The engineering required to operate Clementine was staggering. It wasn't lowered by a cable, which would have spun and tangled. Instead, it was lowered on a pipe string. Each 30-foot section of heavy steel pipe had to be screwed into the next, one by one, creating a 3-mile-long rigid umbilical cord. One of the most significant technical hurdles was the heave compensator. In the open ocean, a ship is never still. If the Glomar Explorer rose just 10 feet on a wave, the 3-mile pipe string would act like a giant whip, snapping at the weakest point. To prevent this, the CIA's engineers designed a massive hydraulic gimbal system. The entire pipe handling floor sat on giant pistons that moved in opposition to the ship's motion, keeping the pipe string perfectly stationary relative to the seafloor, while the ship bobbed 20 feet in the air. Furthermore, the ship utilized the world's first truly sophisticated dynamic positioning system. 5 massive thrusters, controlled by an early onboard computer, used acoustic transponders on the seafloor to keep the ship within a few feet of its target despite the relentless North Pacific currents. This was the bleeding edge of tech, 50 years before it became industry standard. On June 20th, 1974, the Glomar Explorer arrived at the site, 1,500 miles from any land. The tension on board was suffocating. Most of the crew believed they were there to mine minerals, but a core group of CIA officers and engineers knew the truth. They were sitting directly over a graveyard. As they began the slow process of lowering the pipe string, a process that took nearly a week of 24-hour labor, the Soviet Union finally took notice. A Soviet oceanographic vessel, the Chazma, appeared on the horizon. Then came a Soviet tug. These weren't just researchers, they were intelligence collectors. For days, the Soviet vessels circled the Glomar, sometimes coming within 200 yards. The CIA officers had to hide in the hold, while the crew on deck continued the mining charade, even going so far as to use a massive crane to move fake equipment around to keep the Soviets distracted. The Soviets were suspicious, but the big lie held. They couldn't conceive that the Americans would spend nearly $1 billion to pick up a sunken submarine. They believed the mining story because it was too crazy to be a lie. Meanwhile, 16,000 feet below, Clementine was approaching the K-129. The cameras on the claw revealed the haunting, silt-covered hull of the sub. On August 1st, 1974, the order was given to engage. The claw's massive fingers, powered by high-pressure hydraulics, bit into the seabed. The crew watched on grainy TV monitors as the steel tines wrapped around the K-129. "We have a catch," came the whisper through the control room. But the most dangerous part was the breakout. The K-129 had been sitting in the mud for 6 years. The suction of the seafloor was immense. As the Glomar's heavy lift winches began to pull, the tension on the pipe string skyrocketed. The ship's hull groaned under the weight. For several minutes, nothing moved. Then, with a sudden lurch that shook the entire ship, the K-129 broke free. It was coming home. For 2 days, the lift proceeded flawlessly. The crew began to celebrate, believing they were about to deliver the greatest intelligence coup in history. But the Pacific is a cruel mistress, and the engineering of 1974 had its limits. Halfway to the surface, the dream died. At a depth of 9,000 feet, the pressure and the stresses of the lift finally found a weak point. One of the tines on the Clementine claw, specifically tie number 3, suffered a catastrophic structural failure. It snapped. The loss of a single finger shifted the entire weight of the 2,000-ton submarine. As the crew watched in horror, the K-129 began to tilt. The brittle steel of the Soviet hull, weakened by the original explosion and 6 years of saltwater corrosion, couldn't handle the uneven stress. The submarine snapped in two. The aft 2/3 of the ship, the section containing the ballistic missiles, the conning tower, and the cryptographic room, slid out of the claw. It didn't just sink, it plummeted. The heavy missiles acted like weights, pulling the wreckage straight down. When it hit the bottom 9,000 feet below, it likely shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The prize was gone. All that remained in the claw was the forward 38 feet of the bow section. The crew was devastated. $800 million and 4 years of work had resulted in a fragment of a hull. But they couldn't stop. With the Soviets still watching from the surface, they had to finish the lift. They pulled the bow section into the moon pool and closed the gates. When the CIA officers finally entered the recovered section, the atmosphere was somber. It wasn't just a piece of technology, it was a tomb. Inside the bow, they found the remains of 6 Soviet sailors. Despite the Cold War animosity, the Americans showed their rivals a level of respect that remains one of the most touching moments of the era. The sailors were given a formal military burial at sea. They were draped in the Soviet flag, and a chaplain performed the service in both English and Russian. The entire ceremony was filmed, a gesture of honor that would remain classified for decades. The intelligence haul from the bow section was significant, though not what they had hoped for. They recovered 2 nuclear torpedoes, which provided valuable insights into Soviet sonar and propulsion technology. They also recovered various manuals and acoustic equipment. However, the mission's biggest impact wasn't what they found. It was the fact that they had done it all. The U.S. had proven that the deep ocean was no longer a sanctuary. The secret didn't stay buried for long. In early 1975, a group of thieves broke into Howard Hughes' offices in Los Angeles and stole a cache of documents, including those related to Project Azorian. The thieves tried to ransom the documents back to the CIA, but the agency refused. Eventually, the story leaked to Seymour Hersh of the New York Times and later the Los Angeles Times. The government was in a bind. They couldn't admit to the theft of a Soviet ship, but they couldn't deny the existence of the Glomar Explorer. The result was the Glomar response. When asked by journalists for information on the project, the CIA replied, "We can neither confirm nor deny that the information requested exists, and even if it does, we can neither confirm nor deny its accuracy." This phrase has since become a staple of American legal and intelligence culture. It was the birth of a new era of government secrecy. Today, the Glomar Explorer is gone, sold for scrap in 2015 after a long second life as a deep-sea drilling vessel. The K-129 remains at the bottom of the Pacific, its most sensitive secrets likely obliterated by the impact of its second fall. Project Azorian remains the most expensive and complex salvage operation ever attempted. It stands as a monument to a time when the United States was willing to spend any amount of money and invent any technology to gain even the slightest edge in the shadow war. It was a mission defined by, first, the first dynamic positioning, the first deep-sea heavy lift, and the first time a billionaire's eccentricity was used as a weapon of war. Project Azorian proves that in the world of high-stakes espionage, the most impossible stories are often the ones that are true. It was an $800 million gamble that broke apart halfway to the surface, leaving behind a legacy of confirm nor deny and a graveyard 3 miles down.